Good morning and welcome to the Godly Playroom. We are in the season of the color red, that Pentecost season. And although on some church calendars like ours or in some churches that Pentecost is only a day, in this place we like to celebrate that color red for at least the month of June or 1 month from whenever Pentecost starts. So you'll see we're into that second week. It is a time when the disciples were filled with all kinds of energy. And we look around at the world that is greening and growing, and we know some of that energy. Sometimes kids would be in school at this time and starting to become very impatient about being indoors and ready for summer holidays. Some of that impatience is still there. The tiredness of being indoors, of being homeschooled, of being away from friends and other activities. And so we invite you to come into this godly play space and to take a deep breath, to make space for the Spirit as you settle into this time, that you might be more settled in the times outside of this space. We remember that once there was someone who said and did such amazing things that people began to follow him. And the more they followed him, the more they wondered who he was. One time they just had to ask, "Who are you?" And one time, when they asked him that question, he said, "I'm the light." And we remember the light that shines in the darkest of times. Whenever we feel a need for care, for hope, we turn towards the light. I wonder if that dancing flame reminds you of this Pentecost story. It's hot. Don't touch it. I'm going to put the candle up on the shelf so it's a little easier for us to tell the story this morning. And I invite you to take another deep breath and settle yourself into whatever space you're in. Whether that's at home or perhaps sitting outside on your deck watching on a device or a tablet, and just be present to one another. You might even call to mind some of the faces that you would normally see across the Godly Play circle. And think of those folks and send a prayer for well-being their way. We started to hear a bit of this story a few weeks ago. Maybe it was even just last week. It is a story that we sometimes tell in the season of the color red. And we are reminded how the Spirit sent the disciples out into the world to tell the good news, to share what they had seen and heard about how they came to know Jesus in a new way. This story is about one of those disciples. It's called Paul and his travels and letters. It's part of another story related to Paul, and we'll see a little bit more of that one next week. But for now, we remember in the beginning, a baby was born, and his parents named him Saul, after the first king of Israel. Saul grew. He was born in a city called Tarsus by the sea. And as he grew, he helped his father in their tent-making shop. Although Saul and his family lived far from Rome and they were Jewish, they still were made Roman citizens, as were many other people in their city. Perhaps it had something to do with making tents for the Roman army. Saul heard many different languages in the streets of Tarsus, but the one he loved most was the language of the synagogue. Saul and his father studied the Torah together. Saul took very seriously knowing the Hebrew Bible. And so as he grew, eventually the decision was made for Saul to travel to Jerusalem so that he could have the best of all teachers. When that time came, Saul said goodbye to his home and his family in Tarsus, and he traveled to Jerusalem. When he arrived in Jerusalem, the first place he went was the temple. He went there to worship. And he probably later studied there and worked there. His teacher was named Gamaliel, or was perhaps one of the rabbis in Gamaliel's household. Saul wanted to become a Pharisee, who is someone who keeps and understands all the laws in the Torah. Saul took keeping the laws very seriously, and he had no patience for those who did not. One day, Saul heard about the followers of the way. They were saying that the Messiah had already come, and that it was Jesus. When Saul heard this, he became very angry. The Messiah was supposed to drive away the Roman soldiers and rule with justice and mercy. Jesus had been executed as a common criminal. He was crucified. Besides, the Torah said that God cursed any criminal who was hanged upon a tree. These people were telling lies about God. Saul had to stop them. The temple priests decided to make an example. And so they arrested Stephen, who was one of the best known, most important followers of the way. And they took him outside the city gates to have him killed. Saul had held the coats of those who threw stones at Stephen until he was dead. Then the authorities gave Saul a letter to travel to Damascus to find more followers of the way and arrest them and bring them back to Jerusalem to be punished. You might remember this part of the story. How Paul was on his way to Damascus, climbing the hill into the city, when suddenly there was such a bright light that he fell to the ground. He could see nothing. And then in the darkness, a voice came to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you trying to hurt me? Why do you persecute me?" All Saul could do is say, "Who are you, Lord?" "I am Jesus, the one whom you were persecuting. Get up, go into the city, and you will be told what to do." Saul tried to get up, but he couldn't find the path. He was blind. They led Saul into the city. They left him at a house on Straight Street. For 3 days, Saul went without food or water. And then, in the chaos and the darkness of his blindness, he heard another voice. "Hello, brother Saul. I am Ananias. Jesus has sent me to you to lay hands on you, and to bless you. And when Ananias' hands touched Saul, it was like something like fish scales fell from his eyes, and he could see. Ananias baptized Saul, and Saul's life changed forever. He could feel the Holy Spirit growing inside of him. And then he and Ananias shared a meal. Gradually, Saul got stronger, and eventually he was well enough to go to the synagogue to tell the other Jews about the good news of what had happened to him. But when they heard what he had to say, they tried to kill him. They even put guards on the gates of the city so that he could not escape. But the followers of the way took Saul into the city and hid him where no one could find him. Late one night, the followers of the way brought Saul up to the top of the city wall. They carried a basket and lots of rope. They tied the rope to the basket, and Saul got inside, and they lowered him down along the outside of the city wall. And then Saul disappeared into the desert of Arabia. He was so confused. He had been sent to Damascus to catch followers of the way, and now he was one of them. What could this mean? Saul didn't know what to do, but he prayed and he watched the emptiness of the desert and he listened to its silence. And God came so close to Saul, and Saul came so close to God that he knew what God wanted. God wanted Saul to travel to the ends of the earth to tell others about how he had experienced Jesus, about how his hate had turned into love. And Saul was to start new churches where people could show how that was done. But it's not easy work, turning hate into love. And so Saul would write many letters to encourage those churches and those followers to practice that work. And so Saul set out. He sailed across the sea and he traveled across the land. And wherever he went, he told people about how his hate had been turned to love. He even went to Jerusalem, and he met with Peter and James and some of the others who are now called Christians. They were a little suspicious at first, understandably, but eventually they agreed that Saul should continue to tell the good news to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. And so Saul continued his travels. He even wrote letters to some of the churches. He wrote letters to the people of Ephesus and Thessalonica and Corinthia. He even wrote a letter to the Romans, saying how he wanted to come and visit them and then go on to Spain. Saul even decided to change his name. His name became Paul, which was a Roman version of his name. Saul's work was to write letters to some of the churches as well, to encourage them and to help them with their troubles. Eventually, Saul went back to Jerusalem for the last time. The first place he went was the temple. He wanted to offer a sacrifice. He was still a Nazirite, keeping strictly all the Jewish laws, as well as being a Christian. But when the people saw Paul there, they got angry. They shouted, "You don't belong here!" And they began to push him. The Roman soldiers came running, and they pushed the crowds back with their shields and their short swords and their spears. They marched Paul to the fortress of Antonia. They decided to beat Paul to find out why the Jews wanted to kill him. And that's when Paul reminded them that he was a Roman citizen and he had the right to be tried in a Roman court. So they took Paul to Caesarea by the sea. They kept him there for 2 years before they found a ship to set sail for Rome. Saul got on that ship to travel towards Rome, and it sank. But Paul was saved, and he managed to get to Rome anyway. But he was kept a prisoner in his own home. A Roman soldier stood guard at the door. He could still go to visit his friends from time to time. But he had to wait until the Roman court figured out what it was he was supposed to have done wrong. Some people say that Paul might have traveled on to Spain and then come back to Rome. Others think it more likely that he was executed in Rome, perhaps after the Great Fire, which burned the city in 67. I like to think of Paul as still traveling on to the ends of the earth, telling his story about how about hate could be turned to love. Paul himself became a story, and we still read many of his letters today whenever we gather to worship. I wonder what you like best about this story. You might want to pause the video and have that conversation with others in your household, or perhaps take some time to write out some answers, or just to pray about them. I wonder what the most important part of this story is. I wonder if there's any part of this story we could leave out and still have all the story that we need. I wonder what part of this story is especially for you today, or where you find yourself in this story. The next time you're back in the Godly Playroom, you might have a look at the map on the wall. You could probably find a map in a Bible that you might have at home, or even online. You can see Jerusalem is all the way down here, and Tarsus is up here. So where Paul was born, and he would have traveled all the way down here to Jerusalem. And then he traveled all the way over here to some of the other places. Corinthia is all the way over here. And Philippi and Thessalonica are up here. Thessalonica, the letter to the Thessalonians and the letter to the Philippians. And then Paul would have traveled all the way back to Jerusalem. And when he traveled from Caesarea, he went all the way to Rome, which is over here in Italy. I'm going to put the story away now. And you begin to think about what you might like to do in response to this story. I wonder what kind of materials you have at home. Maybe you could make something with your Lego. Maybe you could make a tent with some blankets and some furniture, or a ship to sail across the sea with Paul. You might even like to play shipwreck. We used to play that. All kinds of possibilities. There are the letters that Paul wrote to encourage young churches and to help them with their problems, many of which are still read today. House arrest in Rome. The last time Paul went to Jerusalem. Paul's work was to tell others about how hate could be turned to love, and to start churches where people could show how that was done. It's not easy work, changing hate into love, and we need all the help we can get when that's our work. Followers of the way in Damascus, who helped Paul down over the wall to escape into the desert of Arabia. And that amazing experience on the road to Damascus. I wonder where hate began to turn to love for Saul. Studying in the temple, the language of Torah. And the beginning in Tarsus. This reminds me of another story that has in the beginning, but it's a different color underlay. I wonder if you know which story I'm talking about. Well, I've got some work as well, so I'm just going to get it. You might choose to pause the video and do your work or your response, have some conversation with your household, and then you can start it, and we'll be back again later. I chose to do some work with the clay today. I think I've just been waiting for the right time to get my hands into the mess. And there's something about that story. Changing hate to love. That's rather messy. I wonder if there were times when Paul felt like this clay, pushed, and pulled, and squeezed, rolled into something new. I can't imagine it was easy. Trying to understand what God wanted of him. And in the beginning, things were so clear. He knew exactly what he was supposed to do and how life was going to unfold, and then it didn't. We know a little bit about that. We thought we knew exactly what we would be doing this summer, how we'd be able to travel, visit people. We might even ask others, or be happy to be pushed and pulled and squeezed if it meant we could give someone a hug. I wonder how you have managed to turn hate into love. Or how you encourage others to do that work. I'm going to put my work away and get the feast ready. You might also want to pause the video while you finish up your art or your creation. And you might want to take some time to get some feast ready. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Whatever you have. Just something to drink and a little bit to eat. Our feast is made generous and gracious and wonderful because of the company we keep. And I'm so delighted to be able to feast with you. Well, I have washed my hands. I wonder if we've washed our hands more in the last few months than Paul traveled in miles or kilometers. But let's say our prayers. You might be thinking of all the things for which you're thankful. You might think about the travels that you were supposed to take and won't be. Or perhaps you are able to take some travels in the next little while over the summer holiday. Sometimes in the Godly Playroom we pass this basket around and it enables us to say our prayers. You can speak them or sing them or say them in silence, and whenever you're finished, simply say, Amen. If you get to feast with more people in your household than just yourself, you might choose to pause the video while you say your prayers, and then start it again to join in the feast. Holy One, thank you for all the time that we have had together, for the unexpected ways that you call us to new beginnings. Help us to know that wherever we go from this time, you are with us. And you have a purpose for us. May we spend time this summer to refresh, to watch the growing earth and listen for its song and its silence, until we too come so close to you, and you come so close to us, that we know what you want us to do. Amen. I have some water and some crisps and a few grapes left. I wonder what you have for your feast. These grapes I'm going to call Paul grapes because they seem to want to travel everywhere. But I work on the 5-second rule, even in the Godly Playroom. I wonder where you would go. If it was safe to travel anywhere, I wonder where you would like to go. Or what you might see. We can always take a trip with our imagination. It's much less expensive too. And before we know it, our time is done. And so we gather up our garbage and our leftovers and put them away so that if there's food to eat for another time, it's there. And we look around at those who are gathered with us and give thanks and bless one another so that we know the care and the love that comes from this place to you, wherever you are. And you can share that with others. So watch what happens when I change the light. Right now the light is just in one place and this one time. But when we change it, it spreads out and it will fill this room. It will travel to wherever you are. It will even travel to wherever you might go, and to the ends of the earth and beyond. To infinity and beyond. So watch what happens. The light is ready to go. And so are we. God bless and be well.